Very good noon, viewers. Welcome to this second session. And in the first session, we were discussing about the agrarian system of the Delhi Sultan. In the first session, we had covered and discussed already that what was the pattern of agricultural production and how the land revenue was assessed and imposed on different classes. Now the important points that we are going to discuss in this second session is that how the revenue was appropriated and how it was being distributed among various classes. Before we begin the various categories of the classes involved in this, one point that Professor Irfan Habib has remarked about this particular class, the pattern of agrarian system of the Delhi Sultan, very apt statement of his, that what the Delhi Sultan did, that during the Sultanate period, it systematized the exploitation of the revenue resources. It greatly systematized the exploitation of the revenue resources, and it created its bureaucracy from the principal exploited class. So with these two important features that he was discussing about, that how the systematization of the exploitation of the revenue resources took place, the machinery who are the personals that were being involved, and how the state brought into the transformation into the already old existing machinery that was involved in the process of the revenue collection. It would be interesting if we take the point from the very upper strata. Professor Khan, would you tell us in detail that how who were at the upper creamy layer of who were those who were involved in the creamy layer of the exploitative machinery, or who were the personnel involved in the extraction of the revenue from the top? Mr. Khan, please.
Thank you, Dr. Abha. Actually, as you must have noticed what Dr. Abha Singh discussed in the earlier portion, that during Sultanate period, revenue from the land was the main source of income for the state. Now the question is how state is extracting that revenue, how it is reaching to the state, and along with the state, the whole ruling class, how it is appropriating this whole income from the agricultural surplus. Earlier regime, before the coming of the Delhi Sultans, there were ways of extracting this revenue. Different kingdoms, different territories, different regions had their own ways. Under the Delhi Sultanate or the Sultans, as soon as they came to occupy and establish the Sultanate, the question was how the income of the state should be distributed among the other nobles or bureaucracy of the state. And for that, a unique institution was introduced in India. This institution was already existing in the Islamic West, and many of its major ingredients were directly taken and imposed at the top. So without making much changes at the lower levels, the changes on the lower level came gradually during 300 years of Sultanate rule, but at the top major shift was made, that all the commanders of the army, all administrative superior nobles which came along with the Turkish Sultan and established themselves, they were given out territories in different parts of the Sultanate. They were given territories, and these territories were called Iqtas, and the holders of these territories were called Muktis. So all these nobles were given certain territories, and the size of territories given were depending on the importance of the noble. The armed contingent of the soldiers and all that noble had with them, or that commander of the army had with them, and accordingly the size of the assignment was given. So that was, these nobles called muktis were supposed to collect revenue from the territories assigned to them and pay out of that income to their soldiers and for their own salary and other purposes of the state. Let us see what was this class supposed to do, what were its powers, what was the nature of this ikta, and how was the powers delegated through that. In the beginning we see this whole system is not very organized. It is just that lump sum territories are given, and the nobles who receive them, they even give to their subordinates similarly some territories. So it is a series of sub-assignments by nobles given to their subordinates and commanders. Even older and important soldiers were given smaller territories as revenue assignments. So these were called muktis. What were their powers? In the beginning, the rules were vague, not very clear. Gradually, the changes in the rules came. So let me give you a brief idea of the overall powers of these things. What were the powers of these assignees called muktis? That they will collect revenue from the territories under them, number one. They will collect only those taxes which were allowed. They cannot introduce new taxes. What state decided as tax, only that will be collected by these people. Third, that they will not force peasants under them to part from their lands. They will allow peasants to cultivate their lands. They will not interfere in their activities, and peasants were free to approach the king if they were not happy with the ikta holders' policies and all. Even smaller iktas were given to soldiers. So that means muktis or these ikta holders were to only collect the revenue at the top and not change the policies, either rate of revenue or the method of collection was not in the beginning changed. Second, that these ikta holders can be changed by the king. They will enjoy the ikta as long as king was happy. King at their own sweet will can change these, transfer or remove them from their positions and take away their ikta. So that power rested with the king. That was the nature of the ikta. And what were ikta holders supposed to do in return? What were their obligations? The obligations of ikta holders were that they were supposed to maintain troops or army, look after their discipline, look after their recruitment, their training, and give them leadership. Second, they will pay soldiers their dues. Third, whenever required, these commanders will come for the king to fight along with their soldiers. So they were at the beck and call of the Sultan. Whenever required for any attack, expedition, defense, these soldiers will come for the help of the king. And one thing is doubtful, whether what was excess was remitted to the treasury or not. Say for example, the total ikta's income, some part is salary of this commander, some part is salaries to the soldiers, and some part may be excess. But in the beginning there were no provisions, clear-cut orders for that. Whenever muktis felt that they should send some money to the state, they will send. That was the situation in the beginning, and that mainly changed. So overall, this ikta holders or muktis were the class which was getting all the revenue distributed, and through them to their soldiers, and the whole army and administration of the Sultanate was supported through this land revenue, and it was distributed. This is the classical form of ikta which was introduced. Then there were certain changes in overall management and nature of ikta over the years through the sultans. What are these? I'll give you in nutshell. During Alauddin Khilji's time, since he was more of a centralizing king, major changes take place and a sort of a organized changes and some systematization of the ICTA system is done. What changes Alauddin introduces? Number one, he abolishes smaller ICTAs. He says no ICTAs to small soldiers and others will not be given, and they will be paid salaries in cash. They will not be given assignments to collect the revenue. That was number one change. Second, Alauddin Khilji asked for calculations to be made on the basis of which ICTA can be given. What were these calculations? That now for the first time it was decided that we will give a territory to a commander after estimating the income of that territory. So first it will be seen, say for example somebody is to be given Sambhal or Badaयूं or Bulandshahr or any place as ICTA. So first it will be seen how much of the income of that territory, what is the salary of the commander, salary will be fixed, then how many soldiers are with that commander, what will be the salary of that person's, and what will be excess. So three things were taken into account: the salary of the commander or ICTA holder, salary of the troops under him, the expenses for them, and third, what will be balance in excess of total from that income. And then that commander or ICTA holder was supposed to send this excess to the treasury of the state. So now it was not random assignment, but every commander will be assigned as per their status, as per the estimated income from a territory, and that territory will be assigned and all surplus will be submitted. What happened in the whole process? Earlier, Muktis or ICTA holders were used to having a lot of powers and flexibility and discretion. Now that was being squeezed. Now ICTA holders will show that there is less of income than estimated. Then they will try to cut corners in paying their soldiers. The state will pressurize that why you are realizing less, or your account need to be checked and audited. Then that. Now the whole thing was going on a conflict situation, that the state was trying to extract maximum, Muktis were trying to show less income, and now, but the advantage for the state was that they exactly knew how much income from the state from various territories was expected and how that was being spent on what head, on the salary of soldiers, on the personal salary, and how much was coming to the state territories. In this situation, when Ghayasuddin Tughlaq becomes the king after Khalji dynasty, then since he has usurped the kingdom from the Khaljis, he wants to make certain concessions to the commanders and ICTA holders, which were called Muktis, and he changes certain policy. What changes does he make? He says not to increase the estimated income from ICTA. Annual increase should not be more than 1/10. Generally every year fresh estimates were done, so Ghayasuddin Tughlaq said don't make fresh estimates with higher increase, not more than 10% should be increased in any case. Number second, harshness should not be shown to Muktis. They should not be given punishments and all, as was done by Alauddin Khilji if there were some hanky-panky in the accounts or records. Third thing he said, Muktis will not take from the share of the soldiers. And fourthly, not to harass peasants. Muktis were told not to harass peasants and all for extra realization of the revenue. These concessions made somewhat happy the ICTA holders, but his reign was very brief and he was succeeded by his son Muhammad Tughlaq, and Muhammad Tughlaq made certain major changes. And what was their changes? Now only personal pay was to be paid to the ICTA holders, and there is a shift. Now two types of Muktis are being noticed. One is those who are maintaining the army, they are getting their personal pay, and second is the administrator for that territory. So therefore this is a major departure on which there is some dispute among historians whether this was, how much it was in practice, or whether it was only in select territories where there was more need of a separate administrator, or it was all through the empire. So that is difficult to say, but it is noticed that in many territories there were these two types of hakims or muktis, one directly responsible and another not directly responsible. After Muhammad Tughlaq, Firoz Tughlaq further made the changes, and with that I will conclude this session. What changes were introduced by Firoz Tughlaq? Firoz Tughlaq, as we all know who have studied the political history of that period, accession did not have the support of some groups of nobles, so he tends to give further concessions to nobles and make them happy. And what were these concessions? That for the first time now he fixed the income of the state. The fixed income was 6 crore 75 lakh tankas of the whole Sultanate territory. That means now annual increase will not take place, and muktis can keep all the increase in the revenue collected from their territories, and total income is fixed for the state. Second, no enhancement from mukti, and third, increased personal pay. He increased personal pay of all the muktis 2 to 4 times. Generally, larger muktis were getting 2 lakhs tankas, now it was made 4, 6 or even 8 lakhs to their salary, so it was increased. Fourth concession was the smaller iktas were again started by Firoz Tughlaq. Even smaller administrative officers can be given, even soldiers can be given. And fifth and final, most important change and thing brought by Firoz Tughlaq was that he made ikta hereditary. As I said in the beginning, it was transferable, and Sultan can change any officer, any mukti from one territory to another or take away. But Firoz Tughlaq said now they can inherit. After the death of the mukti, son can get, even widows can get, even slaves can get, even son-in-law can get. So a number of descendants were listed, whoever can succeed, and therefore they would become hereditary, and it was a major shift. That how the officers of bureaucracy of the state can be hereditary with assignments holding with them. And finally, in the period of Lodhis, a change takes place in the ikta system. Now they are no longer being called iktas, these territories and all, more of Pargana and Sarkar, and slight shift is taking place, which in the full blown form we notice in the Mughal period, where ikta is no more there and there is Jagir and all. Now last point I would like to say is about, was whole of Sultanate under ikta, or there were some territories which were not given in ikta. So actually there were some territories which were not given in ikta, and they were called Khalisa. Certain portions were given in ikta and the revenue was collected through ikta holders, as I said, but certain territories directly state was collecting the revenue, and these territories were called Khalisa land. And the income from those directly went to the state treasury, and there was used for the personal army of the Sultan, the establishments and the treasury and other building construction activities of the Sultan. So that was the whole way at the top through which the land revenue was being collected and distributed in the ruling class.
Professor Khan, would you like to speak something on, because Firoz Tughlaq made a very, very drastic changes, and it is generally being blamed to Firoz Tughlaq that on account of his policies, the Sultanate declined because he made the iktas hereditary. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I wouldn't go to the extent of saying that because he made ikta hereditary and that was the reason for the decline, but definitely it had far-reaching consequences. One thing is that gradually the hold of the empire on the nobles declined, but we noticed that at the same time it gave certain stability also in the way it was held, because during the subsequent period the decline of the Sultanate does not take place immediately after Firoz Tughlaq. Maybe Tughlaq dynasty declines, and there were other reasons also for that, but later on we see more than 50 years the Sultanate is prospering under Lodhis and all, and when there is not even that system in place of the ICTA system of the classical Alauddin Khalji or Muhammad Tughlaq's time. So that was supposed to go, probably it was pressure of the times that the nobles were getting stronger, and it was beyond the powers of Sultan as such to keep the control to the extent which was required. So it was actually not a magnanimity on the part of Firoz only, I see, but it was a pressure of the nobility also, which was forcing Sultan to give away some of the powers.
When we are speaking about the ICTA system, then it would be interesting to compare, because later after when we are during the Sultanate period, it was the ICTA's later phase, particularly during the reign of under the Mughals, we get to know about the Jagirs, and it would be interesting to see the comparison between, because Jagirs were also given in lieu of in lieu of the services, certain territories or lands were being allotted. So would you like to speak something on the difference between the ICTAs and the Jagir?
Actually, Jagir is a much refined forms of the ICTA system, and it is much more scientifically calculation in terms of calculations, in terms of relationship with the state, and in terms of the stature and prevalence of Jagirs. There is a lot of difference between ICTA and Jagir, and in every way Jagir system is a much more refined and improved system over the ICTAs, and ICTAs, many of the areas are tentative, which get very well laid down, and we'll go some other occasion into the details.
Interesting, because as you were discussing that how the ICTAs, both the administrative and financial powers were combined, but when we come to the Jagirs, it were not, both the financial and administrative powers were being separated, and this actually what you are saying about how the refinement, how the administrative and financial powers were being separated by Akbar's period onwards, that we get.
Even soldiers' pay and all is more scientifically calculated while calculating the income of the Jagir and Jagirdar.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Khan. Professor Khan has given a detailed analysis on the new class of the superior right holders, that were the ICTA system, through which Iltutmish had consolidated his political gains. That it was Professor Khan, as he had emphasized, that how the system was not a system that was already prevalent or existing in India. This is the class that was being implanted from outside, and this formed the creamy and the highest level of among the personnel who involved in the extraction of the revenue collection as well as appropriation of the revenue resources. So ICTAs. But what happened to the old existing bureaucracy? What was their condition, and who were the intermediaries there involved in the appropriation of the revenue resources at the rural level? In the last session also we were discussing about that how Minhaj was referring that initially it was the Ranas, Rais, Ranas and Rautas. Through them Iltutmish and Balban, during the early Sultans, Delhi Sultans' reign, they imposed the tributes, and actually they were paying the lump sum amount in the form of the tribute to the Sultan, and as now you can understand that to whom they were paying, to the Iqtidars, and Iqtidars, the whole system was working. So it were these Ranas, Rautas, who were at the helm of the affairs. When they were being subdued, they were paying to a new class that was being implanted from the above of the Iqtidars or Muktis, as Professor Khan has just mentioned. So initially there were not much changes, and these Ranas, Rautas were actually extracting the revenue from the peasants, and there were not much changes that were being introduced as we were discussing. Barney also refers that how these Ranas and Rautas, Ranas and Rais were having almost 100,000 of Payaks and Dhanuks, that means the foot soldiers and the archers, but they were no match to the even 600 to 700 strength of the king's army. So he is referring these Ranas and Rautas as the chiefs, and the Rautas as the military commanders of these chiefs. So initially during the early Sultan's reign, these Rana, Rais and Rautas formed the creamy layer of the rural intermediaries. These were the big chiefs at the rural level who were involved in the revenue extraction process. Suddenly, when we come to Alauddin Khalji's reign, we get the reference of Chaudhry. Prior to Alauddin Khalji's reign, in none of the 13th century Persian texts we get the reference of the Chaudhrys. This reference of the Chaudhry comes in the context of the governor or Mukti, the Iqtidar, as Professor Khan just mentioned. So he was the there was a clash between the Rana Mal Bhatti and the governor of Dipalpur. He actually wanted to marry the daughter of Rana Mal Bhatti, who was resisting. Then he asked, governor asked Ranamal to pay the revenue in cash. And when he was unable to pay the revenue in cash, he just ordered that he will not, if he is unable to pay the tax, revenue in cash, he will ask directly the Chaudhry. The word used by Barney is, he directed the Chaudhry and the village headman to pay the revenue, extract the revenue and pay to the Iqtidar, that is who was the representative of the state. So this is a very, very important reference that we get in Barney about the Chaudhrys. This is the very first reference where a new, not only just the first reference, this first reference we can take that from now onwards the process of the change of the rural intermediaries have begun with this, because up till now we were getting the Ranas, Rautas and the Rais. Now the Chaudhry, who was replacing, saying that if you will not pay the Ranas, Rana Mal, who was Rana Bhatti, who was asked to pay the revenue, but he was unable to pay. So a new personnel with the epithet Chaudhry was being asked to extract the revenue, and so this is the first reference of a new rural aristocracy being implanted. 14th century writers, both Ibn Battuta and Barney, refers to Chaudhrys. After 14th century onwards, we do not get the reference of Rais, Ranas or Rautas, but this Chaudhry, Ibn Battuta mentions that he calls him Sadi. Sadi in Persian, Sad is 100. So he is calling that he was in charge of the 100 villages. So Chaudhry was in charge of the revenue collection of the 100 villages. That continued even the later phases. So this is how the process was changing place, the changes were taking place. If you can recall, in the last session we were referring also, Bernie was mentioning that how the 1/2 of the produce was imposed, and he was also referring to the courts and mukaddams in the context of the village headmen. So by Alauddin Khalji, there were the 3 important personnel at the rural intermediary level. As a rural intermediaries, we get the reference who were involved in the extraction of revenue were the Chaudhry, courts and mukaddams, who were the village headmen. Suddenly, when we come to the mid-14th century, we get the reference of the zamindars. Now, what was the relationship of these Chaudhrys, Khos, Mukaddams and this class of zamindars and the old existing rural intermediaries of Ranas, Rais and Rautas? So how this zamindar class emerged, it would be very interesting to trace the development and assimilation process of the old existing rural aristocracy, and how it gave the form and shape into the new rural aristocracy. Because afterwards we do not, after 14th century, from 14th century onwards, we do not get the reference of Rais, Ranas and Rautas, as I just mentioned, and rather the important rural intermediaries who involved in the revenue extraction were the Khots, Mukaddams and these Chaudhrys. And coming to the mid-14th century, we get to know the term of the zamindars. You will find that these zamindars become the main hallmark of the rural intermediaries as we come to the 16th century, the Mughals. So how this emergence of the zamindars and assimilation of the old aristocracy, that was taking place, this is very interesting if we can trace the origin. Professor Irfan Habib looks the development and rise of this class of zamindars in the Rajputras, in the growth of the Rajputs. The Rajputs, the origin of the Rajputs is often being traced from the Rajputras. The Rajputras were the, if we transliterate it, means the sons of the kings. So these Rajputras, he is taking, because he finds that during the 16th century, almost large chunk of the zamindars were Rajputs. So these Rajputra, the rise of the Rajputs just preceded the Sultanate period. The corruption of the Rajputra, the Prakrit form of the Rajputra is Raut. Rautas, we do get the references of the Rautas as we are discussing again and again, that the Minhaj refers about the Rais, Ranas and the Rautas. So these Persian texts do not refer to the Rajputras but the Rautas, that is the Prakrit corruption of the Rajputra. So what happened to these Rais, Ranas and the Rautas? There are two interesting references that Professor Irfan Habib has traced from the Chachnama. Chachnama transliterates the Rajputra, that is son of the kings, as Ibn al-Muluk, sons of the kings. So, and these sons of the kings, Rajputras, are being mentioned in the Lekha Padatis as the Ranakas. So these Ranakas, Rautas and Rajputras, Professor Irfan Habib believes that in the the process to come, because Barney mentions clearly that these Ranas were the chiefs and the Rauts were the military commanders. So in the gradual process, these Ranakas became the Chaudhries, subsumed in the form of the Chaudhries, and these Rautas emerged as the Khots and Mukaddams, which Barney caused that among the higher strata of the peasantry, what Barney says, that were the Khots and Mukaddam. So this was the process how the Ranas, Rautas were being subsumed, and a very important decree of 1353 in which Firoz Tughlaq clearly tries to assimilate the old and the new existing intermediary classes, because in this decree he mentions that the Mafrozis, that were the state appointees involved with the land revenue, there were Maliks who were the revenue assignments, and these Khots. They were all Khots, Mukaddams and Chaudhries. They were all being termed from the by the term Zamindars. So tracing all these development, Professor Irfan Habib believes that now from Firoz Tughlaq's time onwards, this old existing aristocracy, rural aristocracy, was being assimilated, subsumed with the new existing the Chaudhries, Khots and Mukaddams, and were being termed as the Zamindars, and from them these rural aristocracy who was involved with the revenue collection was being termed in or assimilated into a broad category, broad terminology of the Zamindars. So this was how the process of the intermediaries were being, old and new aristocracy was being involved, took place during the Sultanate period. It would be interesting if you can speak something on the overall impact of the land revenue policies and the agricultural production policies, whatever the changes that were being brought broadly during this period. What was the impact in general or on the general economy? Professor Khan, please.
Yeah, so what we discussed till now in the two sessions is that with the establishment of the Turkish Sultanate, Delhi Sultanate as we call it, a number of changes were being introduced in the agricultural production, methods of irrigation, productivity, and overall share of the state and how that share was being extracted. All these measures were having its impact on the overall economy. I will quickly give you an overall scenario what was happening as a result of these changes in the agrarian system at the top to bottom in other areas of economy. Say for example, what was these major changes which were introduced? Number one, new methods of irrigation. That means increase in the crop production. That means more cash crops can grow. What we are noticing is more systematization of exploitation of rural resources. That means more revenue and cash money coming from rural areas to other areas. Number three, who were getting this surplus? Ikta holders and muktis are getting this surplus, and where are they staying? They are not staying in the rural areas. So that means rural money is going out of the rural areas. So how it is impacting? Another major thing what we are noticing is now state wants to collect in cash. That means more monetization, more cash money is flowing into the economy. So all these things, how they are impacting the overall economy? Number one, now there is more monetization. Now more currency is in circulation because more currency is being put to use and selling the crops and commercial activities to sell the crop. A large number of new production avenues are increasing. Say for example, if cotton is growing more and this cotton is being converted into the textiles, and those textiles means new craft being practiced at a more rigorous level, more production of textiles and trade in the textile goods. Similarly, indigo, similarly sugar cane and other such crops are growing more because of more availability of water and irrigation devices, higher revenue rates by the state, more money coming, so that means now craft production is increasing. So one is cash nexus is increasing, more money is in circulation. Number two is crafts are increasing. That will impact socially also, that a large number of people will be involved in those craft production, what is called urban revolution. Say a large number of people who were otherwise following their own crafts, due to caste restrictions now can move to other craft areas because there is a demand in those areas. So that is impacting that also. Third major important thing what is coming is now urbanization is increasing. More towns are coming up. Why these towns are coming up? Because these muktis and ikta holders, they are staying in the administrative headquarters where large number of rural money is coming. Along with them are staying hundreds or even in some cases thousands or more of their soldiers in and around those places. That means the requirement of these soldiers is to be met, more markets, more commercial activity. That means if we notice, the whole scenario of urbanization changes. In Sultanate period, a definite impetus is received for the urbanization. We will notice, if we study the urban history, we will see a large number of towns are coming up during this period of Delhi Sultanate. It is because larger money and concentration of crafts is taking place in certain towns. So what we notice is, at one hand, exploitation of peasantry has increased, more systematized, more money is extracted, but overall economy, that is going into the craft areas, more crafts, more trading activities, more urban centers coming up, and a new class of merchants and all is growing at the surplus of the rural areas, and economy is getting a certain impetus. I am not saying that was doing good to overall population. No, it was not doing good to overall population, because a large number section of population was living under oppression and heavy taxation from hand to mouth, and their survival was also precarious. But at the same time, economic changes were taking place. I think for the present,
it would be interesting what Professor Khan was bringing as far as the impact is concerned. Barney emphasizes on because of this exploitative nature of the land revenue extraction, he is saying that how the agriculture, on account of the land revenue extraction, half of the produce was extracted, increase in the land revenue extraction, the agricultural production was declining, it was affecting, and as a result of that, famines and rebellions. So the important aspect to which Barney was trying to highlight was, he was trying to see the relationship between the burden of the revenue extraction and the agricultural production. He is trying to find out. But though the revenue was one half of the produce, as Professor Khan was saying, that peasants were under oppression, exploitation was there, and Barney's statement that the burden of the strong should not fall upon the weak is far from truth, but there are certain good side also to be seen from as far as the...
What Barney is saying, that the burden of the strong should not fall on the poor, is in the context of when it is uniformly applicable and certain Khud, Muqaddam and Chaudhary intermediaries are not being taxed. But Alauddin Khalji taxes them and says that you do not pass your tax to the lower peasantry, then it will not be passing on.
But certainly important aspect Muhammad Tughlaq's policies, though they were a great failure, but he had started a systematic policy, state policy towards the extension of agriculture. New techniques, as Professor Khan has were introduced, and new systems were being brought into. As a result of that, lot of socio-economic changes were taking place during this period that we would find in full bloom under the Mughals. With this, we end and conclude our this session on Delhi Sultan's agrarian system. Thank you very much. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.